You are at the intersection of wealth, health, and happiness. Welcome to the Wealthy Wellthy Life. Hi, I'm Krisstina Wise, and welcome to the Wealthy Wellthy Life, where I interview thought leaders who teach a countercultural approach to money, health, and happiness, because great riches don't matter if you're sick, and good health doesn't matter if you're broke. Today, I tackle health wealth with James Ochoa. James is a survivor of a near-fatal head injury at the age of 4, which truly posed serious health threat to his mental development. He suffered from the ill effects of ADHD from that young age, which really put him on this journey to find answers. While working with kids diagnosed with ADHD at a summer program early in his career, he identified a brilliance in these people that nobody else seemed to be seeing. Since then, he's devoted his life to studying neuroscience and ADHD, which has led to groundbreaking findings and answers in the field, including emotional distress syndrome, a term that he's identified and coined. He's now an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, and has written a book highlighting his discoveries called Focused Forward: Navigating the Storms of Adult ADHD. In this episode, we talk about ADHD in both children and adults. We talk about how to turn the negative behaviors caused by ADHD into personal strengths. We delve into the science of the brain, particularly mind sight, as he calls it, a learnable skill that allows us to actually change our brains. And we really go deep into talking about tools and skills such as meditation and the power of imagination to really overcome some of the otherwise limitations of ADHD. As somebody who has ADHD themselves, I really found this conversation interesting and truly helpful. So if you or someone you love suffers from any ADHD type symptoms or negative results or consequences of some of those behaviors, I know you'll learn a lot. Enjoy. James, it's so much fun to be here with you today. Thank you for coming over in this crazy weather. My gosh, downpour in Austin,
yes.
Texas.
Yes.
So thank you for weathering the storms and coming over to hang out and have a conversation.
Absolutely. I love that. And obviously, I've weathered a few storms in my life, so this just mimics kind of who and what I am. So I find it pretty perfect this morning.
Well, and that's what I love about you, because that is such a good metaphor that you have weathered a lot of storms, and you teach people how to weather storms metaphorically.
Absolutely. Yes.
And in reality, you have to be able to weather the storm with a good mood, right? Like, hey, it's raining today and it's a little, I have to deal with a little bit more traffic or change a few things around. But at the end of the day, it's all good, right?
Absolutely. I always play with people about being a traffic angel in rain like this. You let people in, you slow down. But yeah, you're right. It's the consciousness you take into the space, even if it's weather that's difficult, that really changes everything. Absolutely. Well,
that's a good segue into our conversation. So I had the real pleasure to meet you through our mutual friend, Lori Marrero.
Absolutely. Love
and
her.
She, obviously, she's both of one of our dear friends, and she's got this ability to pull great, amazing people together.
She does, doesn't she?
But I fell in love with you in that coffee meeting. You're such an incredible soul and a gentleman, and have so much to share with the world to make the world a better place. I was drawn to every word you said. I was right there and like, oh my gosh, this man's incredible. So it's a real honor to have this conversation with you today.
Really appreciate that.
You recently have published your book.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, I say after 27 years of being on the hunt, about 12 to 14 years in concept and 3 years with a writing coach and an editor. Yes, I have a new book out.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's a big deal to write a book. It's not easy.
It is. No, everything they say about writing a book is true. It's a lifelong pursuit. And so, the book Focused Forward, Navigating the Storms of Adult ADHD has really been just a real life course for me. And it's so wonderful to see it out there.
Well, and it's a great book. I read it, and so I read it, number one, to be prepared for our conversation, and two, to learn more about you and having the honor to do so. But thirdly is for personal reasons, is that my son, Kale, he's been diagnosed with ADHD from high school and college and different things. But it's kind of a loose term that's thrown around a lot. So you kind of wonder, like, is it really real, or is it just a label or an easy excuse that we're throwing on kids these days? But once I read your book, I want to say thank you, because I think you're going to change so many lives just based on my own experience, because you helped me understand my son. And you share so much in the book. And one thing you talk about, the first aha for me in reading the book was this has to do with the brain. Like, this is neurological.
Yes,
it's not
absolutely.
just the fact that we live in this digital world that's just easily with all this distractibility, and certain personality types are more easily distracted. No, this is biological. It's neurological.
Yes.
It's built in. So now that I know that, it changes my relationship, really, or orientation, with the acceptance piece of, oh, okay, well, if that's the case, it changes everything moving forward. Can you talk more about what is adult ADHD and this neurological aspect of it that's so important to know?
Absolutely. And it warms my heart to know that a mother is closer to her son. I really, this is the reasons I wrote this, that I want family members to understand the people diagnosed with ADHD and their family. Certainly want the individuals diagnosed with ADHD to understand themselves. But, one of my major bents also is getting out to the professionals who are treating those with ADHD. And so you brought up probably one of the biggest Pandora boxes immediately, which doesn't surprise me about you, on a cutting edge of space. That with ADHD, if you look at it from a diagnostic perspective or a neurological, developmental perspective, yes, this is a genetic condition. It is passed on at the rate of hair color, height, and weight. So it's enormously inheritable. The diagnosis of intensity is what you're born with: mild, moderate, severe conditions. So yes, we have millions of people actually living with the neurological developmental genetic pattern that we diagnose as ADHD very successfully. Some never even discover that they have it, so to speak, because they're managing it. So if you're in a mild course, or you have 2 or 3 of the characteristics, but not enough to really create a deficit in your life or a disordered space, then a lot of times it becomes just a quirk. This is just my personality, and everyone knows this is who I am. And as long as you're living powerfully with that, that's a great space to be in. But I think what you bring up is really critical, is that based on sometimes sensational media, in wanting to look for eyeballs on you or those kinds of things, people will over-sensationalize what it is or isn't. And so if you look at the research measures of this, conservatively, it's about 3 to 5% of the world's population. So it's a very narrow bandwidth. And there are some research that would say 8 to 10%, 10 to 15%. And that's where you bring up what you're talking about is, well, one of the biggest challenges with this is someone will say, everyone's got attention problems, so everyone must have ADHD. And I'm like, well, okay, let's define this. The first part of that sentence is correct. Everyone has attention problems, and I will add in from time to time. Sleep, stress, having a cold, not feeling well is going to cause problems with your focus and concentration. ADHD is a chronic underactivity in neurological parts of the mind that have nothing to do with character or willpower. So it's a short-sightedness, it's an underactivity, it's a nearsightedness of the mind that needs help to be able to focus and concentrate and motivate consistently.
Right. So I think the way I think about that now that I've read the book and listening to you is that we're really in this age with all the technology and social media and notifications and email and the fast-paced life, that we're all distracted at some level. It's hard to pay attention today. And so, certain tools like I meditate, you meditate, like we do have these tools, ADHD or not, to help us become more able to pay attention or hold our focus or be present, because it's so easy to be distracted.
Yes,
but that's distinct and different, even though I find myself distracted a lot because of those things.
Sure.
And really work to be distracted less.
Right.
That's still very different than a diagnosed ADHD that is a neurological issue. And I think the way you explain it a little bit in the book is it's two things. One, it's the prefrontal cortex may be smaller, and or the connectivity about how information travels to different parts of the brain, it isn't linked up appropriately. So it produces certain behaviors or lack of behaviors. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so if you look at the neurological differences, and that's probably one of the most effective ways to look at them, I say this becomes a deficit and a disorder when you don't understand what it is and know how to manage it or navigate your life with it. So if you look at the prefrontal cortex, the left prefrontal cortex, either in size or in what's considered underactivity of blood flow and oxygen to it, is less than what you would anticipate or expect. Once we understood that, actually in the mid-90s, we began to look at, well, what does that part of the mind do? What's an executive control center? So it's the conductor in a symphony. It's the coach on the sidelines of a sporting event. It's responsible for things like planning, prioritizing, being able to evaluate things effectively, along with being able to focus consistently, stay concentrated, and stay motivated consistently. Now, if you look at those 6 factors, Krisstina, that's maturity in adult living. And if it's underactive, many adults with the diagnosis of ADHD appear immature because that underactivity is there. So if they don't understand that and others around them don't understand that, we get into some pretty difficult cycles that look immature. There's also a part of the brain in the center of it called the hippocampus, where the chemical signaling, we believe, is weak, where the signals between the neurons to keep active working memory engaged isn't as strong as it could be. So therefore, in mid-thought or in mid-sentence, I can lose what I'm thinking about. Well, if I don't understand that, suddenly I feel stupid, or I feel ignorant, or I feel broken. But if I understand that, then I can start doing workarounds, associative memory, tagging things with other pieces, putting pens behind my ear to remember something. Then it's just something that I've learned to manage, and it's not a big deal. So
let's talk about that in a second, because I would like to really explore the different tools that we can use, that people can use that do think that they would fall into ADHD. One thing, like when I read your book and I thought about my son, I think the frustrating part, and you put this in the book, it's called consistently inconsistent.
Yes.
And it would make me crazy, because I'd be like, dude, like really just follow through.
Right.
And I couldn't figure out, is it not caring or giving a damn?
Right.
Because some of it showed up like but I know he does, because he has such a big heart, and he's so loving and considerate and respectful.
Right.
But he would be in these disrespectful type behaviors.
Correct.
And like he couldn't attach this behavior to that consequence. So he'd find himself in the same bad consequences. I want to shake him like, don't you see that that same behavior is going to produce that same consequence? And it's like he couldn't. When I read the book, you're like, he can't.
Right.
His brain doesn't work that way. And so when I understood that, I thought, oh my gosh, that changes everything. It's like an understanding and acceptance. Like he physically can't do it.
Right.
So it's not that he doesn't care. It's not disrespectful. It's not an immaturity, like you said. No. It's an inability cognitively, because his brain can't work that way.
Correct.
So for me, it helps. But I'm thinking, then what you say is like the cascade of feelings that come from he's a young adult.
Right.
But what is it? How does it show up in his feelings? I'm not good enough. I'm always disappointing my friends. I'm disappointing my parents. I'm a failure. I'm a screw up. Right. And he's working so hard to not attach those labels to himself. But how can he not, when he's always finding himself in the same mess ups, and he's sitting with that, like, how the F did I do this again?
Right. And so what you're describing, there's sometimes words don't describe the feeling state of beginning to understand that the consistently inconsistent factor has nothing to do with character or willpower. It has nothing to do with the size of somebody's heart or desire. And in fact, those with ADHD seem to try to put more effort into it. Okay. And so a lot of times it becomes even that much more painful when you see the inconsistency. Yet, if you don't understand that about yourself, then yes, you fall into very quickly what I describe as the emotional distress syndrome of ADHD, which is a chronic mental emotional health disruption that how can it not break down an individual's resiliency or persistence or missing potential? You tell me it's impossible. And this is why in writing the book, I wanted to make sure I was crystal clear and in a very pragmatic, simple, engaging way that did not hold any bar or really, I took all the punches off and said, we have to look at this. We have to put it on the table in all its suffering glory a lot of times. And we all have to cry about it. And we all have to understand that these people can get missed. And I will tell you, my passion, Krisstina, is that I feel like my destiny is to reconnect this 3 to 5% of the world. What would happen if we had that 3 to 5% more effectively connected? Who can your son become? What might he change? I literally just saw a client yesterday. He's 26 years old. He had a drop-dead passion about nanotechnology, working in research labs, could not keep up with the details of college, failed out of college, lost that research position. He's in a subservient service job, which is fine, but he's suffering. And reconnecting him immediately back into his passion, you just see him light up. You see him, his eyes go up. He starts talking fast. He's like, oh my gosh. Well, what if he has the next invention that's really going to change the world in 5 years? I don't want to miss that. We don't want to miss that. So when you talk about this inconsistently consistent issue, you just have to understand it as a neurological, neurochemistry weakness. Oh, okay, I get it. So now you can go talk to your son and say, oh, I get it. You're inconsistent here. How might you personally stay connected to this in a way you hadn't thought about before? Now, what I just used was a neuroscience approach of curiosity and observation that allows potentially him to keep the conversation going with you. That's what we're after, right?
It is. And it's two big things opened up for me reading your book. And is an understanding and acceptance. And with that comes the understanding, like putting more pressure on him is not going to work. It's just going to make him feel better. Correct. So learning, it opened up like I need to learn a whole new way of communicating with him and working with him. And maybe as a mom, helping him if he wants my help or just being present with him. Right. But bigger than me, like where it really like emotionally touched my heartstrings was, my goodness. And thank you for giving him a book. And I took it down to Panama and he's excited to read it. But for him to understand himself so that, especially hopefully at a younger age, he doesn't label himself with these things that get stuck. If he can understand it and know that there's tools that he can do to overcome some of the otherwise limitations that come with this diagnosis. Right.
And the overcoming would indicate, that he could get past it, and if you take the overcoming into a powerful navigating my life. So if you give him the education and the understanding about what is the reality, you begin helping him build personalized strategies. It's not about overcoming anymore. It's about powerfully living my life. And, this is what works for me. Of course. But if you get that 3 to 5% neurology again and understand that 95% of the time, you may feel different or awkward or strange, but you don't understand that you need the courage and confidence to stand behind that difference, then you flip over. And that's the emotional distress syndrome again. And so, in this space, I really cannot say enough about the reconnection to those but getting them real information. These are brilliant adults who want to know about themselves. I know your son wants to succeed.
Oh,
okay?
Absolutely he does. Yeah, he so wants to succeed.
Right.
And I mean, I think that's been the dichotomy of knowing he does, but then he's doing all these behaviors that contradict that desire to succeed.
Right. But when you see those contradictory behaviors a lot of time in those diagnosed with ADHD, I do several things. One, I'll tell parents, but two, I'll tell professionals, okay, first, you've got to be curious and observant about, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. You just did X, Y, or Z that seems to be completely opposed to your goals. I wonder what that's about for you. You've got to be curious to help them be curious, because just maybe, and eventually you'll take out just maybe, there's a rhyme and a reason back there. But it has nothing to do with you as an individual trying to figure them out. So I talk about in personalized strategies, these individuals have to go inside themselves and say, okay, what is it about that impulsivity, or I just did this and it looks like it's going to really delay me following through? I don't know what that is, but if I can understand why I did it, or if there's a rhyme and a reason to it, and it could be behaviorally, I really don't want to do it, but I didn't know how to say I didn't want to do it. Or it could be that, I need to go do this research first, but I didn't know how to explain that to someone, so I ran off on this, what looks like a rabbit trail. I don't know what it is. But one thing I can guarantee you is every time I've gone into that investigation, there's a reason there. Many people with diagnosed with ADHD, Krisstina, don't feel safe enough to either look at that reason themselves, believe that it's true, or have a voice to tell their mother or someone else sitting on a board who's going to give them a $2 million investment for their idea to say, this is how I work.
Being okay with that.
Not only being okay, but being powerful with it. It's like, this is how I work.
Exactly. And being able to turn the strength. So I want to talk about that in a second. Two things is that, again, that really struck me is that, okay, let's say our kids and even as adults, they receive a diagnosis of ADHD.
Yes.
I believe it pretty much how it works is there's a lot of distractibility or things in a classroom. Yep. Yep. They go get a diagnosis. Let's say it's ADHD, and then the kids are given medication. And medication may or may not be a good thing, but that's the end of it. And it's the medication is the resolve versus what I loved about the book. And it may or may not be. It's not that medication's bad or good, but what you did is you took it the next level of this is what it is. This is how it shows up. And this is how to work with it.
Yes.
If you medication or not, there are these things to learn about self so that you can turn this otherwise somewhat limitation into a strength. So the reason why I bring that up, because I think it's important for parents and individuals to understand that learn more. There's more to the equation to be able to not only deal with it, but to your point, is turn this into a really powerful strength that you can be used throughout life. Because I would guess, even looking at my son again, that those with ADHD have other sorts of brilliances that they don't necessarily fit. Like what they don't fit into is this very linear society that, very left brain, linear. You go here, here's next. They don't function linearly. Their brains don't think that way, but they can tend to be very creative and expansive and see the world through pictures and relationships and this other sort of aesthetic right brain almost that doesn't necessarily fit in our linear society or black and white linear left brain society. So, but there's a whole different gift
there is.
That if they can understand this is a gift, not a limitation, and work within that, know that they're going to have to do some extra work in certain places because society does work a certain way, like being on time and these different things that...
I have to pay my bills.
You have to pay your bills. There are things that...
we have to do.
We have to do.
Yep. And so I think, you bring up some other really critical points. One of them being that in the diagnostic process, a lot of what you see in childhood is a disruptive behavior, not following through, not staying organized, not staying on task. And it's hard to understand where that comes from when you get the diagnosis of ADHD. And for many adults with ADHD who were never diagnosed as children, they were able to circumvent that disruptive behavior because many of them have a meta ability to look around the big picture, or they have a higher IQ so they can get around the problem at the last minute. So I don't have to study for my calculus test because I can really grok what I need to grok in the 45 minutes I need to, and I go and I ace the test. And then people are stunned that I can do that. And so they live that way, but that's a very adrenaline-produced stress model, which is not good on the body. And I can't imagine you haven't talked about that in your Wealthy Wellthy podcast related aspects of how that a cortisol related, oh my God, it's horrible on the body. But if you look at the diagnosis of ADHD and you look at medication, people may be shocked to know that my perspective on medication is 15% of the intervention. It is a minuscule part. And the other aspects that you bring up that I talk about in the book are education, dynamic strategies, others around me understanding this, what it is, me living from my passion. Because yes, there's research around the ideas of creativity and ADHD that would say, look, creativity as we would define it in a research model doesn't occur any different than the normal bell curve in the ADHD spectrum. So what is this outside the box thinking? What is this giftedness, so to speak? What we believe it is that if you have this is how I explain it. If you have an underactivity in your executive functioning, then that underactivity may actually benefit you because you're not so down in the weeds. You're not so stuck in the minutia. So if I'm not so stuck in the minutia of life, I can make leaps of faith. I can make connections between information in ways other people may never have been able to see. Some of those can be really valuable, new insights, new ways of discovering things. Some of them can be really disruptive. Saying the wrong thing in a powerful meeting to your boss can really cause a disruptive element. And so timing, appropriateness, so all these things come into it. So there's both sides of the coin, but yes, I say those diagnosed with ADHD, if they're not living from their passion, then the risk that they run to get disrupted out of their life is enormous. It could be 70, 80% that they won't reach their potential. But if we put them in their passion or their natural interest, obviously mine in my own diagnosis of adult ADHD is human psychology. I love the way the mind works and how it gets put together. So every new client that walks into my office is a new shiny object to me. Everyone's put together a little differently. Well, I'm working in my passion. I've been happy for 27 years. And I was telling you just before the interview that, one of my taglines is that I say, once you found your passion, what are you in a hurry for? You just have the rest of your life, right? You clearly have your passion in doing these podcasts and the things that you've created in your world. And it's like when you get people diagnosed with ADHD and you get them in their passion and you get the systems and the support that they need, they fly. They fly in ways we could never predict.
Well, and it's no matter what, ADHD or not, we all have our strengths and we all have our limitations and more the weakness side. So, one thing I've learned is I have a lot more limitations than I do strengths. And
Yes.
And any success I've had, I think it's really, to your point, I'm very located in what are my strengths and what am I really good at?
Right.
And I work to stay there. And then I have help for the things that I'm not good at, that there are their core strengths and their core talents. And so it's the help piece, knowing like I have some limitations and I'm going to need help. And because when I have help that my limitations are their strengths, it's amazing what one can do. So it's okay to have limitations. ADHD is one.
Correct.
the rest of us have others, but
well, sure.
But your story, I mean, I love your story, and you're very vulnerable, and you share your story in the book, which I think gives it so much more depth and authenticity.
Thank you.
But I have to tell you that it's really fun because I've read the book and understand, learning about you and your history with ADHD and all your F-ups and,
right.
And your, your journey to get where you are now.
Yeah, it's out there. It's not coming back.
No, but what was amazing is that in organizing and working with you, coordinating with you for the podcast, you were so organized.
Yes.
You were pulling from us. Okay, what questions do you want? And I'm going to go on a retreat, and I have these times available, and the communication far better than most everyone else we interviewed. So it was really funny. I thought, what is the irony? So clearly, you've turned this limitation, quote unquote, into a strength because you have your own help and your own coping skills and things that you, despite sort of the traditional ADHD behaviors, you've so overcome those on the opposite side that you made it very easy for this haul to happen almost effortlessly on our side.
Well, thank you. And so my personalized strategies, anything from my personal assistant, who's been with me 17 years, Kim at my office, and I joke that I'll outbid anyone who tries to take her from me. But that personalization of strategies does allow me to pace myself, to know what I need to do so that the things that show up that have critical importance to me, like doing this podcast and things, I have my systems I fall right into that I look for, when do I have time? But it's all about pacing and knowing myself. If I didn't know this about myself, there's absolutely no way I'm sitting here. And I know that. But I know that's true for other adults with ADHD. So my personal story took a lot of courage and time to really sit and consider the degree and depth that needed to be there. But the degree of authenticity was vitally important because us diagnosed with ADHD as adults who are living powerfully with it, other people need to know, that I'm still disrupted, that I still learn to manage things. That I was telling you, I was up at 2:30 this morning meditating because the opportunities that are starting to surround me around this book and getting the voice out are multitude. There's huge numbers of them, and it's wonderful, but it can also overwhelm me. Mm-hmm. So learning to manage that as I go. So I really appreciate that, and I've had a great time.
Well, you're such a great example.
Thanks.
So anyway, it brought a smile to my face. I thought, that James, he's sitting here, he's ADHD, and he's appears to be so organized. But you have help, and you've got your strategies and your tools. So let's talk about two things. One thing I'd like to talk about for everybody listening is either parents or relatives and or an individual themselves.
Sure.
What are some of the signs of ADHD that might cause one to want to go get a true test?
I think, if you're looking into the childhood spectrum, they clearly have a degree of hyperactivity or degree of concentration problems that appears to be outside the norm of their peers. And some of that is a feeling state, and some of it is you can actually look at the inconsistency that shows up. And so for a lot of parents, I'll say, well, go back and look through their fourth grade year. Go back and look through and just look at patterns. So if you start seeing these patterns of inconsistency that don't make logical sense, it's not that they were sick. It's not that someone died in the family. It just keeps showing up. That's one of the things I ask parents to start looking for, besides difficulties within the school-related issues. But if you look at the diagnostic measures right now, we can go up to, it can go all the way to 12 years old before it shows up. And what we believe is happening in that early adolescence is a degree of detail that's necessary to really keep up with life, organizing projects, staying up with homework, multiple classes at school. That's where the executive underactivity begins to show up. And so you start seeing more problems in middle school, and sometimes it's relatively difficult to determine that and the independence of adolescence, as I call it, that disruptive nature of wanting to do things on my own. But you'll typically show up the common signs. You can look up the DSM-5 criteria and really review those as how disruptive they are. But as you go through life, particularly for adults, Krisstina, who've never been diagnosed or had a good IQ or had good support systems at home, and suddenly when they have to keep up with the details of life as an adult, they're not able to. And so you start seeing a missing potential.
Do you have like an archetype, like a way to describe a person so that people could locate like, oh, that's me, or oh, that's my son,
Sure.
or oh, that's my sister?
Well, let's take a young adult who's in his early 30s, software engineer, developer, very high-end school that he graduated from, did incredibly well in college, has been through 3 or 4 startups in the CTO, in the software development range, okay? But he begins to notice in his early 30s that I don't quite have the same degree of success as my peers around me based on the opportunities I've had. So he had 3 or 4 enormous opportunities, but he didn't quite take advantage of them, or he really didn't find ways to stay with it, or the consistency, or his confidence. Something was missing. And so he would begin hearing from people around him, you're missing some potential. There's some inconsistencies here, and I don't quite know why this happens. So he starts feeling less confident. And so as he's going through his mid-30s now, he's going, what's going on here? And so he starts to seek help. He goes, something's missing here, and I don't quite know what it is, but it starts to show up as depression and more anxiety because now I'm worried. And then looking back through his life history, here's a high IQ, here's really good support systems growing up, but an absolute sense of missing difference of potential. And so he has been working with me year or so now, is in a new opportunity, really dynamic, but staying with it differently. So he knows that he's got to personalize strategies around X, Y, and Z when he's got that opportunity. And so I absolutely anticipate that his trajectory to be enormously successful in his field is much different, because he's going to close this 5-10% difference bandwidth where he wasn't really staying connected.
So it's noticing that he's not keeping pace.
Yes.
Necessarily, and he can't quite figure out why. Like
Right.
I keep experiencing the same breakdowns,
Correct.
or I'm thwarting my intentions somehow, or I'm pissing people off, or something's happening where I have these counterproductive
Right.
behaviors, and
Correct.
I don't know why. Like,
Correct.
so does that sound like a similar situation
Absolutely.
that somebody might find themselves in, and start beating myself up,
Yes.
and like, what am I doing? Or
Yes. So here comes the emotional distress syndrome, as I talk about. So he is in a high-end position, say, and he's at the 60, 70, 80% aspect of a startup and a product that he's developing. And you're around a high-end developers, and you understand in the development of startups, enormously stressful at that space. And he's a little too impulsive. He says things he's not supposed to. He doesn't quite follow through
the foot
on
and mouth
timing.
syndrome.
Oh my gosh. And then suddenly he finds himself on the outside of the fence. And again, he goes, what happened here? Well, that happens 2 or 3 times is all it takes. Someone starts to spin in their own distress. And that, by the way, is a downward cycle, because we know that emotional distress on the prefrontal cortex actually starts to shut it down further. So you start moving towards survival instinct, and I've just got to get through this, and you lose your executive thinking skills further. Now you can immediately put together 1 and 1 here. I've already got an underactivity as a result of the dynamics and the genetics of ADHD. Now I have an emotional distress that's shutting it down further. And you can begin to see why the emotional distress syndrome of ADHD is so critical as a breakdown point for those diagnosed with it.
And then we create these stories that I'm
Yep.
not good enough, and
Right.
then and then the downward spiral.
And then I live a marginalized life as I talk about it. And that is so painful to watch in an adult who had a degree of potential or a new idea, or, they were sitting on the edge of an invention that just didn't pop because they
Couldn't bridge that gap.
Well,
that little
they
bit.
they screwed it up.
Yep.
They lost footing. And I've sat in front of that pain for decades. And my book is about, I'm not sitting on the sidelines anymore. I have an answer. I know what it is, and you need to know it.
Well, and again, I think this can be a lifesaver for so many people. I mean, literally in some cases, but really metaphorically.
Absolutely.
Just giving people an understanding of, oh my gosh.
Yep.
So now let's jump to what to do is you offer a lot of tools in the book, and there's a few that I really wanted to talk about because you have, 6 or 7.
There's a lot of fun.
Right. But so to talk about, okay, now it's like, this is me or this is someone I know. What tools or what can people do to start changing behaviors or helping and moving it to more like to be able to
really turn the corner on it, as
I guess that's what I'm trying to.
And I would say it's a lot simpler than we think. And the first part of it is that if you really believe you recognize the characteristics either in a family member or as a professional, in a client, or in yourself, then you do go get good information. It's really frustrating for me that folks will say, well, professionals in the field are, labored by pharmaceutical companies and this. We are licensed professionals to diagnose and evaluate a condition. We're not trying to find something that's not there. And so it really frustrates me that the public says that everyone's trying to just find it. That's not true at the real professional level. So you do find someone who is well-trained with a good degree of experience in the diagnostic measures.
So step 1 then may be, okay, if this sounds familiar, go find a professional.
Do something about it.
Do something about it. Are there professionals that specialize in ADHD that would be more likely to recognize or diagnose this as the 3 to 5% that you're talking about?
Absolutely. And so you've got master's level professionals like myself. I'm a licensed professional counselor with a lot of very specific training in the diagnostic measures of ADHD. You'll have psychologists who will do full psychological testing that will give you entry into understanding your IQ and processing speed, which are all helpful information, can also diagnose those with ADHD. And then there are many psychiatrists out there who will do an office interview and get the initial piece in the diagnostic measures, who understand ADHD and what it is or isn't. So you've got several spectrums. You've got a lot of support groups out there. CHADD.org is one of the biggest national support systems. You've also got ADDA.org, which is another support system. And all those portals are going to have good information on them about professionals who can help you understand if this is real or not.
Great. Now, the next tool that I really liked that I thought is so important, and it's really easy to jump to the strategies without missing this first one. The tool of acceptance is what you call it.
I do. The tool of acceptance is a tool because if you don't start with looking at reality, then everything else is seen from a lens that's not going to be effective. And so to me, the reality is, okay, I'm failing. I have not taken the opportunity of these 3 or 4 projects that I could have taken to a very high level. I have failed out of college. So you have to look at the pain many times, or you look at the reality of what is, and understand, okay, I'm different. My neurology sets up like this. I have 3 to 5% of the world's population that's like me. This doesn't make me bad or good or different or better. It just is. So I'm this tall, I'm this short, this is how much you have to look at reality.
I had to accept that I'm only 5'2".
Okay.
You're
I
right.
have to accept I want to be 5'7", and I'm really 5'6".
When you put it that way, I think it's helpful. Like, yeah, would I like to be 5'7"? Sure. Am I ever going to be 5'7"? No.
Not with very high platforms.
Right, exactly. So if we can put it in that context with that acceptance piece, I think it's so important. Like, this is who I am, and it's okay, and I need to accept this.
Right, because the acceptance, too, brings down the wall of resistance. And if I can bring down the wall of resistance in accepting what is reality, then I'm not defended against it.
And not wishing too. Right. Like if you spend if I spent my entire life wishing I was 5'7", and it completely disrupted every part of my life because I'm not.
Right.
I mean, it's easy to see the consequence of that. So this is the exact same thing, right?
Exactly. And so get reality, really accept what this is, and then you can begin to move on to different strategies.
Okay, well, great. So I think it's such an important piece, and acceptance, not just for the individual themselves, but for family members and that sort of thing. Like I said, it's really reshaped my thinking, and I think will completely change the relationship with my son, which is good. But I think it can be so amazing for him to feel accepted too, for just the way he is, versus for what he's not.
Absolutely.
The second thing that, any of my listeners know what a proponent I am of meditation and mindfulness,
Great.
Especially in today's world, ADHD or not, but especially for ADHD, right? Because I think that these times we're in is just making it that much worse or more difficult. So would you talk about the tool of meditation and mindfulness and how that plays into this?
Absolutely. And I think it's been such a huge development, particularly in the United States in the last 10 to 15 years. But I think if I start with meditation and mindfulness, I am absolutely fascinated by the research that started in the mid-90s, actually, in looking at fMRIs, or blood flow and oxygen through the brain. And they were actually looking at monks who have been meditating 20, 30, 40 years. And we're seeing absolute differences in areas of the brain that create balance and insight and action. So we know meditation is strengthening our ability to be compassionate, to be empathetic with others. So it's a great place to start to understand meditation. When I talk about meditation, I say, look, you got to remember the first rule of meditation is everyone is distracted all the time. It's a part of the process. So the Dalai Lama gets distracted in his meditations just like you and I do. So that's not the issue. The issue is being able to put yourself back on point, to be able to recenter your breath or focus back on what you were wanting to work with. So when you look at meditation and mindfulness for those diagnosed with ADHD, what you've got is a tool to help them feel centered. And the chaotic nature of the neurology based on disruption, disorganization, thinking outside the box, being impulsive, that's all disruption. So someone with ADHD may not really understand what it feels like to be centered or to be focused or concentrated and settled. So over time of meditating, I've been meditating a little over 6 years now consistently. I talk about that there's 3 forms of meditation for those diagnosed with ADHD to work toward. One is you start with guided meditations. So you know someone's teaching you what it feels like to follow and stay connected. Secondly, you use periods of silence separated by a bell, and actually love an app called Insight Timer, which is a socially networked app for meditation. I think it's got close to 1 million users all over the planet, so you can see how many thousands of people we've meditated with. It's a wonderful app, but it allows you to get periods of silence separated by bells. And what that is, Krisstina, is now the person with ADHD is training themselves to be focused or recenter during those periods of silence. And then thirdly, I say is a contemplative level of meditation in which I'm doing something for the act of conscious awareness. So now I can fold my clothes, I can wash my dishes, I can go for a walk in the woods, I could sit out on a rainy day and just contemplate the nature of whatever I'm doing in a really peaceful way. I was telling some clients recently that I was up in New York City, and I had a very wonderful contemplative meditation opportunity in a packed subway going on the number 6 line from 185th Street down to 14th Street. And there are more people in the subway than you'd ever want to count. But I became contemplative on that subway. And I looked around and I became curious and observant. And I slowed down my breathing deliberately. And so what I walked away with was literally what felt like a spiritual experience to me
on the New York subway.
That's
awesome.
Packed. But I did that deliberately. So meditation and mindfulness is critical to learn how the mind settles down. And the quality of it is like the quality of exercise or sleep. It's going to change from time to time, but sticking with it is critical.
And meditation is medication,
Yes.
but meditation also it's an exercise for the brain too.
Absolutely.
So knowing that the brain does have some limitations, it's working, it's exercising. So if you have atrophied muscles,
Yes.
working it.
Right.
I mean, exercising the muscles help the atrophy. Now, the
Correct.
muscles, if there's something wrong, they may never form
Right.
completely
Right.
like other muscles, but
Right.
they can become stronger
Right.
versus weaker.
Correct. So when you get a parallel kind of metaphor, the science of the muscle is different than the science of the neurological network of the mind that pulsates through chemistry, connecting it together. But the idea that I can connect neurological networks of chemistry, which is how the mind operates in staying effective and keeping us alive in our consciousness, is to know that in meditation, I can become aware of that. I can feel it. And I use a lot of tools in the book regarding the science of the mind and how to calm yourself in the ideas of meditation. So the last thing I'll say the piece about meditation, Krisstina, that's critical is I ask people to raise it to what I call as a Maslow hierarchy of need. It's got to be with food, water, and shelter. It has to be at such a high level in today's world because of the stress and information and things that are coming at us. Otherwise, we're over in our lizard brains, right? Just running around trying to survive. And that's just not okay with me.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. And we could probably talk about that for hours.
Weeks.
All right. So one final tool I want to talk about. We're
Great.
approaching the end of our time together. This has flown by, and I know we could talk forever.
We could.
And this is one that really excites me. And you and I talked about this a little bit offline, but it's the tool of imagination.
Yes.
And I'd really like for you to talk about this a little bit from my own personal standpoint,
Sure.
because for me, where the imagination piece was really great is, number one, even what I've noticed with my son, for example, who's ADHD, is he has an incredible imagination. But I think this, as adults, imagination is something we're not supposed to do. It gets shut off. It's a daydreamer. It's it's
a waste of my time.
It's a waste of time. And Cale is a daydreamer, and he has these beautiful daydreams, and he's an artist, and he could put those daydreams on a piece of paper, which there's a beauty to that. But the point is, number one, I think that gets shut down societally.
Right.
And then two, I look at someone even by myself, not ADHD, but I think, imagination, that's not what I should be doing as a type A, person that's got all these things to accomplish.
Correct.
But I really started looking at that for myself, and I thought, wow, because I had a pretty tough childhood and some trauma at an early age, I shut that imagination piece. Two things happened. Number one, I shut down the real imagination piece because life got pretty serious pretty early. But then I did realize later that I think some of my coping skills through some of that time was I would go out to a different world, which was a really pretty place that was kind of the saving mechanism too. Correct. So I haven't spent any time really thinking about that. But when I really thought back, I thought, wow, I think there's a lot of the power to this imagination piece that we don't really have permission as adults to tap into. Right. Nor do we know how to tap into it. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would love to. And in fact, I think this is probably one of what I consider my shiniest objects right now, because if you look at the science of imagination and the research that's being done on it, we don't absolutely understand what is going on in the science of the mind or in the chemistry or the how the mind is doing it, so to speak. And there's some fascinating new research being done around imagination, which I work to keep up with. But one of my intriguing discoveries around the emotional distress syndrome of adult ADHD was in using imagination to literally build internal worlds for individuals who I work with so that they use those worlds, Krisstina, in an imaginary way to calm themselves down. And the most effective way to explain this is that, look, we know that people diagnosed with ADHD have a higher degree of disruption. They're easily thrown off center, whether that's the characteristics of the diagnosis or just how the brain is set up. We know what happens. Okay, so let's accept it. What happens in that disruption is that your body is going to move toward a survival instinct. It's going to fight, flight, or freeze it, and it's going to use a heavy level of trying to keep you in the game. But that is a very difficult chemistry system in the mind. What I'm asking people to do is to, when those disruptions happen, and even before they happen, they build these internal worlds using their imagination so that they calm down, they feel strong, they relax in these worlds. So now when my disruption happens, I have another choice, and I'm trying to circumvent, to some degree, a survival instinct, which I never will do. Our survival instinct is hardwire coded. It needs to be. It's great. But I don't need to exercise it. I don't need to activate it too often. And that's what the distress of ADD does. So I tell people, look, we're going to build these imaginary worlds. It's going to feel crazy. You're going to feel a little weird, but that's okay. Because this is the science in the mind that says, if I can build these worlds and rely on them to calm myself and stay powerfully connected, now who can I become? So I've been playing in my imagination in these ideas of worlds to create since 1986. I understood the science, the beginning science of it in the late 90s, and I have enormous aspects of my imagination built on these worlds that, as I understand it, it's an adult, mature form of the use of imagination. So I talk about it as therapeutic daydreaming. I'm daydreaming for the therapeutic reason of mental and emotional calming and safety in my life. Now I've just taken imagination that I naturally had in childhood. We all had it. And I've morphed it. But I don't think adults know how to morph it or to mature in the space of using it. And you do have to remember that I put a section in my book that really debated whether or not to put there, but it really needs to be there. And it's helpful, is great moments in my imaginary history. So I give people an understanding or an insight as to what some of the worlds look like for me. But those worlds, because I'm thinking about them in an imaginary way, and they're not Newtonian science reality of hard objects, it's got a wispy kind of feeling to it. And that's okay. And so don't expect this hard reality of a floor underneath my feet, so to speak, but understand that it's still effective and important. And that's just one of the natures of the imagination. It feels kind of wispy, but boy, is it a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah, I really love that you did put some of your alternative worlds in the book. And I loved it because I thought, there's something really wispy about that.
Yes, there is.
That like, wow, I want to experiment because
Right.
it might be fun to see what worlds, who would show up in those worlds, and what conversations could I have? And it seems like it's on the edge of crazy, but we're all on the edge of crazy anyway.
Right,
so.
But what do we identify as crazy? Something we don't understand, or it feels a little disruptive, or it's unusual. That's
right.
okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. This is based in reality, and I'm using it to calm myself, so that when I'm on a subway in New York City, I don't have to get enormously frustrated and become mean to other people. Mm-hmm. I can be contemplative and clear and help a woman who's trying to carry a table off of the subway at 6 p.m. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been meditating or been contemplative or using my imagination.
I love it. Well, It reminds me of one of my favorite all-time books, and it's Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich.
Absolutely.
And he makes it very clear in there.
Does.
He has all his mentors, most of whom are dead.
Absolutely. He's got his balcony. Exactly.
He does. And he's having conversations and receiving messages from them all the time. So
I do want to say real quick, what we're doing in the science of the mind with those imaginary conversations is we're actually creating a loop of relationship to ourselves. I mean, we could get into metaphysics of are we connecting actually with those people? And that's intriguing conversation. But the reality is it is a loop back to myself through the concept or the memory of what another person reflects to me. And so it's a mental gymnastics game, Krisstina. And it's a wonderful one, just like we have for exercise physiology for the muscles of the body. This is a great one. It's a lot of fun.
I love it. Well, it's something I'm going to...
I have a lot of fun with it, obviously.
I'm going to start experimenting with. All right.
Good.
Well, we're at the end of our time together. There's one final question that I ask all my guests. And everyone I bring to the show, they're a little unconventional in their own ways. And that's part of my goal is to do some myth bustings, to kind of break through some conventional thinking that's keeping us trapped, that it's not true, but we believe it to be true culturally, familial, whatever it is. So in your work and your experience now, what's a myth that's in your field that's that you see it's mostly believed to be true, but from your perspective, it's flat out false?
Well, I think the simplest myth is that ADHD was a produced diagnosis by a pharmaceutical industry to push drugs. And I'm just going to call it what it is. And the reality is that would mean that there are licensed medical doctors and psychologists who have morals and ethics behind everything they do that would have been hoodwinked and that would be practicing unethically. And I really can't say it in any other way. It's an understood condition that we use a medical Western diagnostic measure to understand. Okay, we'll get that. Take it for what it is, and now start to function with it. How much energy do we use as a society and in media to try to debate the idea of the diagnosis and the reality of it? And if we took that energy and we put it over into functioning or understanding or compassion or strategizing with these people, where would we be? That's what I want to know. So my call out is stop debating the diagnostic or the information. I don't care if you use that system or not. Stop debating it. Get into the functioning of managing and helping people stay connected to themselves. And let's watch where the world goes. So stop debating that this isn't real. Understand the nature of it and get on board from a point of view of helping those really live a powerful life.
I love that. Well, and that shines through in your book.
Yeah,
so,
well, thanks.
James,
I really appreciate that.
Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, really. Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's just been, these are the kind of voices I want to get out there. And meeting individuals such as yourself are what I call the synergy of my life that are just, there's no mistakes involved. There's a show up, take the opportunity, and just, shout from the mountaintops, right? So I really appreciate your willingness to have me on and to really get that voice out there. Thanks.
Well, thank you. You make the world a better place.
I really appreciate that.
For everybody listening, we'll put all the links to James, his book, in the show notes. I read the book. It's my book is underlined and annotated and highlighted. So anyone, if you think that maybe you might have ADHD, you would want to certainly read the book, or if you have a family member too, to understand better. Yep. But we'll put all that in the show notes. Any final words?
I would just say that it's a time of enormous change in our world, and it's time for this kind of change around an empowered approach regarding ADHD that's not a pie in the sky. It's an absolute reality that people can stay connected and live lives in a different way. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you gained some new insights through my discussion with James. If you'd like to learn more about James's mission or his book, Focused Forward, Navigating the Storms of Adult ADHD, all of the links are available to you at wealthywellthy.life/podcast. And one more thing, this month I'm teaching Money Mastery Skill Set. So if you're finally ready to master this money thing, be sure to sign up for a free online educational event at mindfulmoneywebinar.com. Next up is a true brain expert, my friend Ashley Stewart. She's a pioneering neuroscientist. And if you've been following me, you know I love this field, this new field of neuroscience, the latest field of neuroscience. So if you're interested in understanding your brain and mind on a deeper level, you won't want to miss it. Here's to a wealthy, wealthy life. I'll see you next time.